Hi, this is Mike, Professor Salisbury. Glad to have you with us today. We're going to have a panel discussion about musical theater, and I'm glad you're here. This is the first chance you get to see me, actually be me here in front of you there. And so I just want to say hi, and I'm loving getting to know each and every one of you. I've got a group of people. We just finished doing our show, and it's a musical theater show, and we just finished doing it. So we've come up here, and we're going to do some quick question and answer kind of time. But I've asked 5 of my colleagues here at the theater, professionals whom I admire and whom I work with every day, but I've gotten to work with some of them in other roles as well, and they are great people. So I can't wait for you to meet them. I'm going to let them introduce themselves, and we're going to have a Q&A for you. All right? Kristen, would you start?
I'm first. Okay. Hi. I'm Kristen Abels. I am in the show here. And yeah, I've been working in musical theater for several years. I don't know, straight out of college. Worked in musical theater. I've worked in regional theater in Indiana. And yeah, now I'm in Missouri and doing the shows. Yeah. I play a lot of old ladies, even though I am 27. Might actually still have a little old age makeup left over in the creases, so don't look too close.
Hi, I'm Justin Abels, married. I've been working in musical theater for like about 8-9 years. I have a BFA from Coastal Carolina University in musical theater. I worked up and down kind of the East Coast doing musical theater. I've also done a lot of puppetry and educational theater and some Shakespeare as well. And I'm also a director on the side as well.
Awesome. I'm Tiffany Bear, and I'm also married to this one, who you'll hear from in a minute. My undergraduate degree was actually in music education and theater, so I also am a certified teacher and have taught in the public and private school system in Baltimore, Maryland, and in Charlotte, North Carolina. I've actually been teaching for 12 years. I know I don't look that old, but so yeah, privately and also with theaters and conservatory programs, I've partnered with them as well. So that's kind of the education side, and then I went on to get my master's degree right out of college in music performance. So really strictly in the classical world, but I was the black sheep that loved musical theater and jazz, so I really have made that my career, really more in the musical theater world. So I've kind of done a variety of things, from on-camera commercials, film, voiceover, modeling, shoe modeling, like you name it. I kind of have had a very versatile career in addition to the acting, directing, teaching, all of that. So yeah, lots of stuff.
Shoe modeling.
Right?
She has great feet.
Great feet, right? Once upon a time.
Yes, I'm Conrad Bear. She said we're married, and my background is also in music. I have a master's in voice performance, and I've done a lot of voice teaching and a lot of music directing, some stage directing. Did a lot with middle school and high school music theater directing in both theater and in music, and yeah, also an actor with these wonderful people. So I kind of come to it from a classical singing background, and have had a lot of fun exploring the different styles of musical theater coming out of the classical background. Yeah.
Hi, I'm Peter Gibbons. I am not married. I was the only one here. Let's see, I got a degree in voice performance from the University of Kentucky. I also they had like a certificate program for musical theater. It's a developing program. And I also got a theater minor. I've been working, I think I took my first professional contract in like 2013. So I've worked all over Kentucky. I've worked in Montana. I went on tour with children's theaters there, so I went all over the United States. I've worked in Ohio and Illinois. I've done a TV show that was super fun. So my main area is, I guess, performance. I also do a lot of audio work, a lot in theater. I did that all through college and freelanced a lot. So I kind of have the tech side. I do a lot of that stuff. So yeah, that's me.
Yeah, I want to thank everybody for being here. I appreciate it. Nick, I want you to pop around and just show your face there. At least say hi.
Hello.
Nick. This is Nick Haney. He's our videographer. And he also is a musical theater performer and does great things with us. So without further ado, we're going to start asking some questions here. First one I'll aim to the directors among us. I'm wondering, at what points in the process as a director do you find yourself really interacting with the history side of musical theater. What are the key places that you feel like, oh, I really need to have or want to have a handle on musical theater history in order to do my job as a director? Anybody?
Why is everybody looking at me? History, especially depending on what piece you're really diving into, whether you direct in it or act in it. But I think specifically when you direct, is looking at where the piece originated and where it came from. A lot of stuff that's in the musical theater canon is sometimes it comes from real life case, like one of my favorite musicals, Parade. It came from a novel, but it also came from a real life court case as well. And so you can actually look into that of how, sometimes within a musical we will change text around a little bit or change some events around. And then you can also look back on the actual real people and what they were like that sometimes a musical might just gloss over. And sometimes I think it's also cool historically to look at the process of when a musical was being developed, what was some of the ideas that were being tossed around. A lot, like we did Woods this year, Into the Woods just for fun on the site, and the process that they took trying to develop that show was really interesting because they took so many different routes to eventually land in the piece that we see as the original production, but they opened that up. James Lapine talks about that in a couple of interviews. He opens that up like, hey, we tried this historically within, us trying to put up the show for the first time, but you can take these other avenues that we've tried. And I think that's really interesting because you can still get the same show, but it can have a different, flavor to it and have a different look to it. And, we can get that also just from the original text and the original tries of the show throughout the history of that show.
Yeah, I think, just like Justin was saying, if you're asking about like when in the process do you start to think about the history of a piece, I think that starts right when you're looking at scripts. Honestly, right as we're reviewing and going, okay, what do we want to do next year? Is it Shrek or Addams Family or Oklahoma or Showboat, which are from so many different eras of musical theater. So even right as I'm pulling out a script to read it, I'm thinking in my head, okay, what was the context of this piece? What was going on in history that made this piece, be written? What are the themes that this piece is speaking in that context? What of those actually relate to us today? How can I take the message that was maybe written in Showboat in 1930s of racism and cultural shift and take that and apply that today? Is that something I want to do right now? Or no, maybe we're going to do something like Shrek where it talks more about discovering who you are, and using the pop music to infuse in that. So yeah, I think that history is important right from the minute you start picking up scripts to look at them. Going into a show, not having done that research, you could really do some damage with the piece if you're not keeping that on your radar right from the beginning, I think. So.
And I think some of that plays into, then this would kind of bridge directing and acting, but you are trying to get at what the composer of the music or what the person who wrote the musical was getting at. And that's fun when you have other material that, especially if it's live or it's historical stuff that you're drawing from, because then you have real events that you're trying to get inside people's heads. But you want to, as a director, help your cast get into the mind of the person or people that wrote it, so that they can present that. And sometimes those people wrote it so that it could grow, and you could make your own decisions on it, but you want to dig into that story and build everything off that to begin with. And so that is history. That is music history or theater history. Yeah.
Yes?
No, go ahead.
I was going to say, something I like going back, because we're talking about like Showboat and a lot of older stuff, is also looking back into, and I like doing this as a director, some people don't, but like I like watching multiple versions of a show, because you see stylistically how, especially like you talk about Showboat, which is like what, 1930, I don't know, been a while since I took musical theater history.
They can look it up.
But you see like stylistically how acting has evolved, especially in the musical theater canon over the last 100 so years, because now we're starting to stage shows a little bit with a more transparent ensemble, that it's very stylistic now. It's not very operatic anymore. It's not very stand and sing. It's very expressive. It's using multiple people. It's using multiple art forms at once. And we're starting to go back now, with revivals like the current Oklahoma revival, the last Once on This Island revival, which is now a tour, where it's not just a musical theater piece anymore, it's an ensemble piece, and now we're setting it in a different time and era with a different audience interaction. we're starting to invite more people into that, and that has evolved historically.
That's wonderful. That's a great transition, Justin. That's wonderful because we want to save trends and where we're heading for the next discussion that we have. But as actors, where in your process as actors, where do you use the musical theater? I mean, you're getting the concept from the director and whatever history that the dramaturg might bring to the show. But as actors, where have you used musical theater history in your process?
Yeah, so I think that everyone's kind of touched on this idea is that a lot of times when we look at musical theater history, we don't recognize the fact that it's not history that's in a vacuum. Like cultural history that's happening, political history that's happening, social history that's happening, technology history, all of that stuff is like just as relevant to our study of the musical as what's happening in the walls of a theater.
Right.
So with that being said, there's just so many implications of history that you need to know, and they talked a lot about context. Like that's so important. Like what's not just happening in the political scene, but how is the culture responding? And I think it's cool just to see how musical theater history reflects culture and culture reflects musical theater history, and that's the case with art history, with dance history, with instrumental music history, the history of opera, and all of that stuff. It all ties in. So, I mean, as an actor, I mean, even if it's a more modern show, like Hairspray or something, written modernly, but about the 60s, like when you talk about things like race, like you have to know what like minstrel shows are.
Right.
You have to know what blackface is. Like you have to know those things to really appreciate what's really being discussed, because especially directors will see right through it if you didn't do your homework.
Yes.
Because when you start talking about lines in a show that refer to real life people and like jokes that happen, so I said Hairspray, they have so many jokes and things about specific people in the 60s.
Yes.
And someone like me, I don't know these people off the top of my head. I didn't grow up, that's when my dad was growing up.
But somebody does, and people in the audience will.
Yes.
Exactly. So, and that's, it's a challenge as an actor, because especially if you're doing like community theater shows, like it's a side thing, it's a hobby, and it's easy to just kind of skirt that responsibility, but like it's those little things that make or break a show. And so if you don't have that knowledge, like there's just there's just so many areas of theater that the history reflects and affects. So it's like how do we prepare as an actor with music history? Like you just like every way,
at all points,
and like it's things that are just tucked away in the back of my mind that I know about. Oh, this show did this, or this happened during this time, and it's like all these little pieces that are constantly coming into play. But doing research kind of helps with all that to put it all together.
I think that's great, Peter, and I want to add one thing that came to my mind when you were talking. It's not just the leads and the characters who have to do this research. Ensembles, especially the chorus, they better know their stuff too.
I mean, you take a show like Hair. Like Hair is literally the hippie movement thrown onto a stage. So like every person has to know what's going on.
Right.
Because if you don't understand what that movement was, then like you can't be an effective ensemble member. Because like you have to have a story, you have to know the context, you have to know the history, because it's such an ensemble-driven show, and there's so many shows that are like that.
I think musical theater, most of the time a piece was written, it has so much specificity to it. There's a very specific, even within concept musicals, there is a special time, there's a special place that's happening, every character is very individual, and that has to show. We don't do a lot of musicals that are very kind of everyday 21st century. It doesn't really it's not as interesting, especially for a musical. So it's also knowing from just a directorial standpoint and acting standpoint, just how those characters physically interact. There's people in the room. Just kind of like what Peter was saying about Hair. It's just like it's not even just knowing about that time period, but it's how these people were acting, watching footage about what their body language was like, what their physicality was like, what they're drawn to, what they like, what they're against. What does it mean to throw your fists in the air. You know, what does it mean to protest? What does that look like?
Yeah.
And honestly, it makes the whole process so much more fascinating because you end up learning. For me, performing makes me learn more and get into the shoes of somebody in history in a way that nothing else does, because you're forced to put yourself in their shoes and be like, why would they have done this? Why? This is happening in their life. This is completely removed from mine, or it's very similar, or whatever. But it completely is a different thing.
Especially if you're in a character or you're directing a show where there are characters who would make choices that are so against anything that you would ever think of doing or believe or whatever. As a director, you have to come to that and say, well, how do I portray this honestly, accurately, without gypping this character of their full story? And the same thing as an actor, you have to say, okay, well, you know, no, I wouldn't specifically make that choice in my life, but if I was in their shoes, if I get into their world, how would I respond to the world around me? And then by doing that research, you're able to accurately and honestly portray that decision, which honestly, that's what's fun about what we do. You know, that's what's rich about it.
That's what's so powerful about musical theater.
Yeah.
It's like, this is kind of an irrelevant caveat to musical theater history, but like seeing on stage what someone's mentality or the culture that they're in, like seeing that happen in front of you puts you in such a more sympathetic state to like really get what's going on that like I don't think any other medium really can capture well. Like I've done shows that were so powerful to the audience just because you're digging really far into their psyche and what's happening to really understand what they're saying, you know, even if you don't agree with it.
I'm going off track just for a second here because we're all playing in a Bible show currently. And so from the perspective of believers, and you're portraying biblical characters or ensemble characters in biblical times, what kind of delving into the history or the historical period and stuff have you had to do for the work we're doing right now?
Well, I think I would start off by saying that humanity is humanity is humanity is humanity. Like ever since the world was created perfectly and we were stupid and chose to rebel against God, like it doesn't end. You know, the curse came upon this earth and we've been on a collision course ever since. And so whether you're doing a secular show or not, or you're a believer doing a secular show, or you're a believer doing a biblical show, either way you're dealing with people who are having emotional struggles, spiritual struggles, mental struggles. And so people are people, you know, whether you're with the Lord or not, you're still a human and we all struggle with the same thing. You know, scripture says there's nothing new under the sun. It really is true. So whether you're dealing with Samson being an idiot choosing to lust after Delilah, or you're dealing with, you know, Will Parker and Ado Annie having a little, you know, rendezvous, either way you're dealing with the same thought pattern, the same decisions, the same consequences or not consequences if you get away with things or whatever. So really, humanity is humanity. I mean, I think that's what it comes down to. It's just people are people are people. You know?
And we actually, in rehearsals, we went through everything we were told by the director that, you know, these were our given circumstances for the time period. And, you know, it's the Hebrews and the Philistines are at odds. And then all of a sudden this Hebrew hero just appeared. And it's like, well, that's amazing. But we are still terrified because we've been beaten down so badly and for so long. And so, and then sometimes we're also the Philistines. So, I mean, that's cool. We just go back and forth. But yeah, it's just, it's heavy.
Good. Okay, good. Back to, I wanted to get that in there. It suddenly was fine. You still okay?
I'm good.
Perfect. Okay. Tiffany, you mentioned we start dealing with the history the minute we're picking up a show. I'm interested, for the directors especially, to what shows or types of shows are you most drawn in the musical theater canon? I mean, there's a lot. My students so far have found that there's a lot they didn't know about musical theater history. And so what are there particular eras, particular types of shows? And this is for directors who are choosing shows, or as an actor, shows that you found yourself, I would want to audition for those shows or that kind of show. So.
Oh gosh, that's such a such a tough question, I feel like, in some ways. I'll jump in and then you all can tag off of whatever, because it'll probably spark some other ideas too. I grew up watching a lot of the old videos like Rodgers and Hammerstein and Fred Astaire and Ginger Rogers, so I definitely have a soft spot for all the classic era legit musical stuff. Definitely love all of that stuff. And I think what it really gets down to for me is a good story. I love a good story that takes me on a journey. Not that I have to sit there for half an hour going, okay, where's this going? I want to be captivated in 5 minutes. And same thing when I'm looking at a script or I'm auditioning, if in the first, or a book I'm reading, if within the first chapter I don't go, ooh, what's going on? I'm usually like, I'm going to move on and find a better story. Same with a TV show or anything, I like a good story. Now that could be a piece that has a really strong statement, like West Side Story, where it's dealing with racism, or it could just be for fluff and entertainment, which is, there's nothing wrong with that. I mean, we're musical theater, we're jazz hands and all of that, that's okay. Just pure entertainment is great, but I definitely am drawn to classic shows, generally first, before modern ones, and as long as it's a good story, that's what I love. Now, I mean, I will say shows like Shrek and stuff like that, I adore stuff that's witty humor and stuff like that too. So, but yeah, good story. That's what I like.
I'm going to jump in here real quick, just so you can get to know me for a second. I'm with Tiffany. I really like classical musical theater, the golden age, all of that. Your professor kind of goes on record as being the one who's like, yes, and we have to do it this way and everything. I'm this way about Greek theater, any kind of theater. I love to do classical types of work. So just so you know that about me, I'm just putting that out there. But I like new stuff too, but I'm a little more wary of that. Rest of you.
I think when it comes to like choosing what to audition for or trying to get contracts for, the reality as an actor is like you take what you can get. Like that's the truth.
Whatever is there,
but
right?
The kind of practical side of that is you're kind of looking for things that you'd be right for.
Right.
Yes.
For someone like
that's
me
really
who I have a degree in opera, like Golden Age stuff is great for me.
Yes.
Because that requires a more polished sound that I'm more vocally inclined to. I love the new musicals and I can do those things, but you also have to look at the type that you fit into. So there's just a lot of things that come into it, but at the end of the day, you're putting yourself in front of as many people as you can, and then if things happen well and you have to decide between a couple contracts, then there's a lot of things that you can make these choices of like, oh, I really like this script, or I really like this theater, or I like this director. But more often than not,
when does that happen?
Yeah, more often than not, it's you audition for what you can and take what you can get.
What's coming up?
Well, I think the great thing about that with type as well is that yes, you have to know yourself, you have to know what you're right for, but using the theater side of it, knowing what shows are and having a more involved knowledge of theater history, you can go, oh, this theater is doing Mary Poppins, Gypsy, I'm literally just naming a season that I did, Fiddler, and a show that I forgot. Oh, Catch Me If You Can. And you can go, okay, like, yes, that's a lot of different eras, but I know that I can fit into this because that's how I know, like, what my voice will do. I know what characters I could play in that. Theater history, it's funny because you think theater history, and I'm like, okay, carousel, showboat. I'm thinking all the way back. But theater history is current. It's still going on. Yes, there's all the trends that we won't get into. But, like, being up on it and knowing what is in different shows is really just going to inform you of your own opinion. Yeah. And, if you want to have an opinion about it, you can.
Yeah.
Because you just have all this stuff.
I mean, it even goes into, like, I know people that have different resumes.
Yeah.
They send to different theaters.
Yeah.
If it's a more legit theater, a Golden Age theater, you're not going to say that you just went on tour for 3 years with Evan Hansen.
That's right.
And
you're going to say,
like,
I was ensemble and Fiddler on the Roof.
Yeah, you're going to say, like, oh, I did Fiddler, I did Showboat, all these different things, and even headshots. You're not going to put a super
commercial headshot.
You're gonna give it a little of that ha-cha-cha, that the Golden Age era has. So so that's another area where it just comes into play.
So going back into that too, what Kristen was just saying about theater history and knowing different shows in seasons, because oftentimes you're not just auditioning for one single show, you're auditioning for a full season. Like if you go to audition for Toots down in, or Tuts, however you pronounce it, down in
Because who wouldn't want to audition for that?
Listen, you're just
I'd
born
be
with
ashamed.
it.
If you're auditioning auditioning down for Tuts.
Theater Under the Stars.
Theater Under the Stars in Texas. If you're gonna go down there and audition for hot takes. If you're gonna go audition for Theater Under the Stars or a similar theater where you have that full season, you know they're gonna look at you for multiple shows. So you need to know all of that. And I've lost my train of thought.
I'm so sorry.
That was great.
It gives me so much joy.
So good. I'll come back to it.
Yeah.
Just you take it.
I was just gonna say, going at a kind of a different angle with it. I think one of the really amazing things about musical theater, because it is musical theater, is that there's music in it, and that helps drive the story. And so I find myself, I'm a big sucker for story as well. I find myself being drawn to music. Well, I love good melody, but I love music that once you get into it, you don't get sick of it because it drives the drama forward. And that's the ones that you can just keep doing over and over and over again, because the music is so intelligently written that it is the drama.
Yeah.
And plug for opera, if you haven't experienced it, that is actually that is very prevalent in opera, and that's where you really dig into it and appreciate it. That's what you start coming away with. And so those are the kind of shows I really enjoy.
Okay, so what I was going to say is, and we'll get into this more with trends, but going off of that knowledge of musical theater and knowledge of shows and knowledge of your type and stuff like that is also learning the directors and learning the individual theaters.
Yes.
Because you need to know, okay, Showboat was done this way in 1930, but there was a revival in 45, and there was a revival in 1995, and the 95 and the 1930 are drastically different in the way they were staged, the concept, the way that it was sung, and the styles and the people that were chosen for different parts, completely different. Same material, totally different setting. And a lot of that was driven by the director. So looking at a theater and knowing who the music director is, who the director is, if you don't know who it is, go look it up. Go look at the works they've done. Go look at the way they've handled the works, because you can get to know a lot about how that show is probably going to be staged just by looking at, okay, this director recently did Guys and Dolls, but how did they stage Guys and Dolls? Oh, they staged it totally out of context in a really cool new way. Well, you can guarantee they're probably going to stage Oklahoma in the same way. So, and same thing with Into the Woods. We did it in a very stripped down sort of way, really kind of experimental, conceptual style, which worked really well for the ensemble that we had. But getting a chance to hear the director's vision before you audition or doing some digging will really help you to go in and give a good audition and be smart about it. And to make the decision, if you're like, I love this show, but I don't really love the way it's going to be staged, maybe not the show for you then. So yeah, that history is important too.
Good, great. Oh, you guys are doing so wonderfully. I love this. I love this. This is for directors or actors from either perspective. What has been the best advice that you've gotten in the course of your career or in your education? What's your best advice as far as either performing or directing, specifically musical theater?
I think I think the best thing that, and I don't think this didn't click with me, and I don't think until I started directing, is that musical theater is so vibrant and so real and so living that it's fantastical, because of the element of especially we have so many musicals that are based on historical events or it seems like real events, very real people, but there's also this element that's taken from opera, which is the sung, the sing of a living person's life, and put on top of that. And I think a lot of people in musical theater, we try to run from that, and we try not to experience that. We think it's kind of hokey, that it's, it shouldn't have that much, I guess like a sprinkle of dream about it. That it's actually what makes it a living art, is that it's very real people, but we get to experience their fantasies, who they want to be, their inner life, in a larger, more fantastical way, because we don't experience musicals in real life. I'm not sitting there at the copy machine. I start singing about what I want to do when I grow up.
Well, except here, we do, but yeah.
And that's kind of the biggest. And I think as a lot of actors starting training, we try to run from that because we're like, it needs to be like ultra realism, but it's not. It's just very realistic wants and needs in a very beautiful and fantastic setting. And I think now we're really starting to see that in direction. And I know we're going to talk about trends, and that's all I'm going to talk about. But we're starting to see that even more in the 21st century in musical theater because we're not hiding our ensemble anymore. We're really showing that we are building these fantastical moments of a song in front of people. And so yeah, it's just always knowing that just like that song, that soliloquy, that big ballad, like that is